across all of our campuses. We're glad you're here with us. Let me ask you this question, and my hand's up because I'm going to ask you to put your hand up. If you've got this thing called a family, raise your hand. All right, keep them up. If you come from a family, raise your hand. See, we're all in this thing together, man. You can put your hand down. Welcome. You're at Bethlehem Church. All things family, we're going to hop into it. You're with us, Oconee 211, watching online, with us in the room, in the South venue, wherever you're at. We are glad you are here. And here's how I want to begin. Have you ever heard, you probably heard this statement. I remember my high school football coach telling me this. He would say these things to us when we're hot and we're sweaty in the middle of two-a-day practices in July. He would go, gentlemen, when he looked at it in our face, looked at us like, what are we doing here? Why are we wasting our time? All of our friends are out swimming. We're here and it's hot and we're sweaty. And, he could tell we weren't glad to be there. He would say, everything worthwhile is uphill. Anybody ever heard that? Everything worthwhile is uphill. What that means is everything in life that matters takes work. You with me? Like it takes a little sweat equity, takes a little effort. The best thing in life don't come easy. And sometimes in faith journey, we forget that because it kind of freaks us out because we're people that believe you were saved by grace through faith. And grace is like, well, no, it's not effort. It's not work. It's all grace in the faith journey, right? But there's these words called obedience. There's these words called surrender, right? There's these words called walking in holiness. There's these words called submission that takes something on our part. Take something on our part. May I remind you, grace is opposed to earning, not effort. Scripture talks about work out your salvation with fear and trembling, right? And there's this thing that happens in us in this journey. And he would say everything worthwhile is uphill. This is what I know. What's worthwhile is your family, and it's uphill, which means it takes work. What's worthwhile is your marriage, and it's uphill, and it takes work. What's worthwhile is raising a family, right? Raising kids, and it's uphill, and it takes work. All of us want the same words when it comes to family, whatever season of life we're in. When you think about family and marriage, whether your kids are grown, whether you're newlywed, whether you're a grandparent, whether you're a single adult looking to have a family at some point, whether you're a high school student, when we think of family, we think of the same words we want. We think of family, happy. Nobody goes, you know what I'm after? I'm after dysfunction. Well, I'm looking around. None of you go, you know what I want? Just a dysfunctional mess. That'd be a blast. We want happy. You know what we want? Healthy. Healthy both emotionally, physically. What do you want from family? Joy. What do you want for family? Peace. Followers of Jesus or not, when it comes to our family unit, moms, dads, sons, daughters, we all want the same thing. But here's the difference. I love this statement. Leadership expert, pastor turned leadership author, a guy named John Maxwell. I read him. He said this one time, and I've always remembered it. We tend to have uphill dreams and downhill habits. Is that not true, especially when it comes to family? Uphill dreams, we want the same things. Happy, healthy, whole, peace, joy. The problem is not what we want from family. The problem is the habits we have in family. Come on, church. The problem is not what we want from family. The problem is the issues in there. And so this week, in fact, we're kicking off a few weeks on just the idea of family wherever you're at. In fact, say that word with me, family, on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. That was good, but I think you got more into your third service today. The first service was a little louder than y'all. There are not near as many people in here that first service. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. We all got them. We all come from them, right? What I do every week is talk to husbands and wives, moms and dads, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, stepmoms and stepdads, single moms and single dads, grandparents. We're a church that's dominated by family. A church that's dominated by family. For better or worse, the most marking relationships in your life, the most formative relationships in your life is families. And the reason we're calling it Road Trip is because if life is a journey, or for all of you country music fans from 10, 12 years ago, Rascal Flatts, life is, isn't there like there's a few songs you can just sing and everybody knows it? Cars made it famous. That Disney movie, do you know who actually wrote the song? See, no, somebody in the last service yelled it out. Some guy named Tom Cochran, who's Canadian, right? Right, but Rascal Flatts made it famous. If life is a highway, if life is a journey, the vehicle we experience this thing called life in is your family. So all we're saying This vehicle we experience life in, no matter what stage our life finds us in, no matter what season, the most formative relationships in your life, bar none, are your family. They're the most marking relationships. They're relationships that are the greatest blessing, and at times, come on, they're the relationships that are the greatest burden. So here's three things. Three things that are just foundational for our conversation as we hop in, right? That are true of every person in this room, and I want you to put them down. They're in your notes. I don't choose the times in which I live. I don't choose the times in which I live. When I was in seminary, which is preacher grad school, for all of you like, did he say cemetery? It's kind of the same thing, right? Which is preacher grad school, okay? They didn't give me a book. They didn't give me a course. They didn't write a chapter on how to pastor in a pandemic. There was never anything they covered. You didn't get a manual on how to parent during a pandemic, right? None of us thought, you know what I want to do? I want to live in a very divisive time where everybody's mad at everybody and everybody's distracted to everything. I want to raise kids in that environment. That's what I want to do, right? That just sounds like a blast. In fact, when everybody's fighting over vaccines and masks, I just want to raise a family right in the middle of all that. Nobody ever said that. You don't choose the times in which you live. And at times you look at our world and you can get discouraged, especially as a mom or a dad. I mean, it can be discouraging. I'm with you. What I'm going to remind you this series is God has called you and appointed you to a time like this, and he's sovereign over all of this. He's sovereign over all this. Here's the second thing. You don't choose the family you come from. Right? For better or worse, you don't choose the family you come from. Some of us, if we're honest, in the dictionary it says dysfunctional, and there's your family right there that you come from right there. Anybody with me? Like somebody in the last service raised their hand in the back. They're like, this guy, for dysfunction. I'm with you, Pastor. The family you come from, the family of origin. We all got them, for better or worse. And we're deeply influenced by them. There are 60-year-old people that have the same habits they had since they were 15 because they saw it in their mom and dad. There are marriages that look the same way. They saw their mom and dad's marriage, and they're like, we're never going to be anything like that. And here you are at 45, and you're everything like that. Why? Because your families have a deep influence. But we're not going to spend time talking about our family of origin because you and I, if we're in Christ, we bear a different name. We're part of the family of God. And that forms who we are more than our family of origin. And here's the third thing. The thing we're going to spend a lot of time talking about. I don't get to choose the direction of my family. I do get to choose the direction of my family by the choices I make. And notice I said choices. Because there are no quick fixes and instant prayers that give you a happy family, a healthy family, great kids, and a wonderful life. It doesn't happen in instants. Most families are not defined by one moment the world sees, but by thousands of moments the world doesn't see. Can I say this to you? I've done a lot of weddings. I'm looking around the room. I've done weddings for people in this room. The world's not defined by your wedding picture. The world's not defined by you think that. The way moms go out of their way to make sure their daughter's wedding's unbelievable. No offense, moms. I work with you in the weddings, and it is planned to a T. To a T. And everybody looks the part, and here's the crazy thing. There's not one person whose life's been defined by some random wedding ceremony. It's defined by all the other moments that the world doesn't see, right? Think in a road trip. I want you to talk for a second. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I'm not in 2 minutes. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. In your family, the people you came with today, with your kids, with your friends, husband and wife, the most memorable road trip you've ever had. I want you to think about it for a second. Not in a plane, like road trip, like we're going on one. I want you to think about it for a second. In 30 seconds, the most memorable road trip you've ever had as a family, I want you to discuss. Think about the most memorable road trip. 30 seconds. 1, 2, 3, go. Most memorable road trip. Most memorable road trip. As a family, we experienced. Memorable road trip. Now, how many of you involved a broke down car somewhere along the way? right? How many of you involved somebody barfing in the back seat? You're with me, right? I remember before I was married, I was 19 and I got a chance to start preaching at a young age. People would call me, and I thought I was a big shot because I'm 19 and people would go, hey, come preach. And I thought it was because I was good. Now I learned it's because I was cheap. You know what I'm saying? This kid will come preach to you for $100. And they're like, somebody would call me in the middle of Tennessee, we want you to come preach to our youth, and we'll pay you $100. I'm like, are you kidding me? Here I come. I'm in the mountains of Tennessee 30 minutes before we're supposed to speak at. Backwoods of Tennessee, the mountains. And this is before the days of Waze and Google Maps. Anybody remember those days? Waze, Google Maps, before those days. Couldn't find my way, so I pulled over, and this old timer comes out, and he looked like this quintessential. I'm telling my kids this. And my son's like, Dad, you should have asked Siri. Caleb, my youngest one. We're driving around Tennessee last year, and he's like, Dad, you should have asked Siri. I go, hey, boy. Siri wasn't born yet. You know what I'm saying? Shut your mouth back there in the back seat. I didn't say that last part. But I pulled over because the map I had, the almanac or whatever I was looking at, Atlas map I had, wouldn't get me there. And I pulled over, right? And this guy with this, kind of overalls and big beard, talking about different times, looked like he was straight out of Andy Griffith. He comes out there in a place where they still pump your gas. You know what I'm talking about? And he looks at me and says, son, you look like you lost. I said, yes, sir. And I told him the campground I was supposed to look at. He kind of just laughed and chuckled. He goes, son, you can't get there from here, right? Worst words you can ever hear. I got to preach in 30 minutes, man. Obviously, you get there from here, but he's saying you're a long way away, and there's no easy way to get here. In this moment, listen to me, church. In our cultural moment of pessimism and cynicism and bitterness and confusion and chaos and anxiety and entitlement and busyness and corruption and distraction, in this cultural moment you live in, you will not get the family. You cannot have the family that God desires living by the world's values. The family you want, happy, healthy, whole, isn't going to happen if you're operating by the world's system. And it's possible. Jesus taught this. If you got your Bibles, Matthew 7, real quick. Jesus taught it's possible to believe the right things about God and live by their different value system. Jesus actually teaches this in the Sermon on the Mount. The greatest sermon ever, where moms and dads, anybody see the show Chosen? Have y'all seen that show on TV, the app Chosen? What a great show. The last season they just put out, Jesus, the last scene is where he's teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. And crowds are finally coming to hear him. They've heard about this miracle worker. And moms and dads who've been marginalized and oppressed, they come to hear Jesus. And Jesus preaches the greatest sermon ever, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And I'm going to take us to the end. In this series, what I'm going to do is work us backwards through the Sermon on the Mount. Greatest sermon ever. Jesus would teach this, right? And the Sermon on the Mount is not an ideal. It's not a sermon about an ideal world, an ideal life in an ideal world. Sermon on the Mount is about a kingdom life in a fallen world. You're not raising a family in an ideal world. You're not married in an ideal world. You're not raising kids in an ideal world. You're not looking for a spouse in an ideal world. You're looking for a spouse in a broken and fallen world. Right? And so here's the question that we're going to ask for a few weeks. What does it look like to have a kingdom-oriented family in a broken world? I want you to hear me say this. You can believe the right things about Jesus and live all the wrong ways. And actually, Jesus teaches this, Matthew 7. Here's what he says. And everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rains fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it didn't fall because he founded it on the rock, a foundation. Everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rain fell, beat against that house, and it fell, and a great was the fall of it. There's a difference between hearing Jesus' words and building your life on them. Knowing the right thing and doing the right thing are not the same thing. Here's really the question. Actually knowing the things that are true and wanting to do the things that are true are actually the question Jesus is getting at, that you actually want to. That's a whole different story. So Jesus tells a story. He said there's two guys that set out to build a house. Anybody looking at them would go, these guys are building a house. Anybody looking at them, they would go, these guys are doing the exact same thing. A house is a metaphor then like it is now for building a life. Jesus ends his most famous sermon by telling a parable about two guys who were building a life. They look at it, they're doing the same thing again. What does everybody want from family? Happy, healthy, whole, joy, peace. Follower of Jesus or not, we all want the same thing for our family, for our marriage, for our kids. Our desire is the same thing. And Jesus says there's two guys that are building the same thing. Anybody looking from the outside in would go, they're both building a house. And what exposed what they were doing isn't what it looked like on the outside, but the foundation that it was built on. Jesus says the firm foundation are these words of mine. Everyone in life faces personal storms. Many of you are walking through your own personal storm. We're all the last 2 years walking through a cultural storm. Like uncertainty. What makes people different isn't what we desire to build or desire to have. What makes people different is the foundation that they build it on. Right? The question isn't what we're all trying to build. Every one of us in this room wants happy. I do. Everybody wants whole. Everybody wants full. Right? Everybody wants peace. Everybody wants joy. Again, nobody goes, no, man, you know what I want? Dysfunction. Nobody says that. But what's the difference is what we're building it on. So I'm going to give you a couple of thoughts through this whole series about what the foundation our culture leads us to build family on, whether we know it or not, and what Scripture teaches. So briefly this morning, let me just give you an example. Let's start with this. We'll unpack this. In fact, next week we're going to talk a lot about anxiety. Jesus talks 20% of the Sermon on the Mount is about anxiety. Did you know that? 20% of what Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon ever, is about anxiety. They actually had anxiety before there were smartphones. It'll blow you away. We're going to hop into it next week because anxiety is something that marks our families. And so here's what I want you to write down. In a culture that chases an image, we're going to be different because we're going to be a family that chooses what is real. Mass marketing, consumerism, industry, retail sales is based on the idea that this thing will make your life better. This season will make your life better. Will make you look better. Will make you feel better. In a world interconnected by screens, do you realize we watch other people? And by other people, I'm not talking about athletes or celebrities, although we see them. Our friends, our coworkers, our neighbors, our friends from high school, our friends from years ago, our friends that our kids go to school with, the kids that we play ball, we watch them live their life, play their life out on a screen. We watch the highlight reel of their life on social media. I don't think we understand, listen to me, from the front to the back. I don't think we understand how much of our life we are told subtly in a billion different ways that we are conditioned to believe. If we just look like this, if we just have this, if our marriage just, right? Like if he could be, or if she could be, or if our kids could, or if they could. Can I say this to you? We are conditioned in our culture, every person in this room. I'm not pointing a finger, I'm raising a hand. We are conditioned not to be content and chase the next thing. I'm fine the way I am. No, you're not. You don't realize how much is in you is conditioned to chase after the next thing, the next place, the next season. What does that look like? This is in your notes. We never say this out loud, but we think it inside in our head all the time. Life would be better if. Life would be better if. Our marriage would be happier if. Family would be easier if. Students do it. Singles do it. Couples do it. Again, we don't drive down the road with our significant other saying this. If we do, normally it's accusational and things don't go well. But we all are conditioned. That's the foundation of our culture, is to chase an image. Things would be better if. There's another word for image. It's an architectural word. You know what it is? Facade. Facade is this idea that there's this outward appearance that's concealing a less pleasant, right, inside, if you will, a less pleasant reality. So there's a facade. There's this outward exterior that looks this certain way that's hiding that the building's actually decaying and falling apart. That's what a facade is. Speaking of road trip, you know the greatest facade that's ever been had when it comes to family and vacation. It's the place that the guy with ears came up with. Right here, here's the word, Disney. Talk about a facade, right? The most happy place on earth, said no parent ever after being there 30 minutes. Anybody been to Disney in the room? Raise your hand. Who's with me on that? Listen to me. There are people who go to Disney and then there are Disney people. I'm a person who goes. I'm not a Disney person. Which one are you? But Disney's the idea, the greatest place on earth. You just won the Super Bowl. Where are you going to go? The happiest place on earth. In fact, there's a comedian. Anybody heard of the guy named Jim Gaffigan? He's a comedian, okay? I think he's hysterical. He's really clean compared to most comedians. Let me preface this. Every once in a while, he'll drop a word. So if you go watch it and you're like, my pastor listens to a guy that says a bad word. I told you, right? You send me an email, I'm going to say, I told you he did every once in a while, not much. But I say all that to go. He does the best bit on Disney I've ever seen. He talks about the idea of this image and this facade and then the reality. So take it away, Jim. He says it better than I can.
Last summer, we did our first big family vacation. Well, I should clarify, we went to Disney. Now, if you haven't been to Disney as an adult, just imagine you're standing in line at the DMV, and that's it. Actually, it was Orlando in July, so it was kind of like standing in line on the surface of the sun. Why would we do this to ourselves? Remember when you were a kid and you'd go on vacation, you'd be like, why is Dad always in a bad mood? Now I understand. How can I spend an enormous amount of money, be uncomfortable, and listen to my children complain and whine? Disney. Oh, good.
Come on, who's with me, right? My youngest son's like, Dad, this is like 2 weeks ago. When's the next time we're going to go to Disney? I said, Jesus will return before that happens. I promise you, I'm not going back. But we experience that in life, the facade, you know? A few months ago, I told you it's the grass is greener kind of mentality. Right, I got choked up. The grass is greener mentality. And the reason the grass is greener is because there's manure under there, man. Right? And you want to roll in the grass, you just don't want to taste the manure. That's the deal of image. We see it, we know it, but it doesn't matter even when we know it's hollow. There's something in our culture that conditions us to go after it. And here's the two words that define a culture, define families that are based on image. Jesus said there's a firm foundation, there's other foundations. These words are mine are the firm, but let me tell you the pressure that we see. In our culture of image, here's the two words that define a culture of image: performance and comparison. Excel, succeed, achieve, look the part. I'm nailing it. Look how strong we are. Look how good we are. We got our act together. When I talk to other pastors around the country, one of the things we talk about, it's amazing, whether it's California, whether it's down here in the South, whether it's up in New York, and I've got a group of friends that I run with, and we'll spend time together, and we'll just talk about pastoring larger churches and situations like this. And we talk about the fascination of social media is that it's unbelievable that you can sit and talk with a couple. And again, when you're counseling a couple and you're helping with somebody, you want to do that. Pastor Shane's in here. He does it for us a lot, with me, with some of the other guys in the room, some of the other ladies. Right? We're all for being in the middle of your family, but what will blow you away is you'll sit and talk to a couple that's an absolute mess. Things are going on. God loves them. We're for them. We're with them. And what blows me away is 3 days later, there'll be a picture on social media that says, look how happy we are. Facade. That's all it is. Why do we do that? Because we live in a culture that performs. It's supposed to look the part. Or comparison, which means we're always looking over our shoulder. Again, we don't say these things out loud, but I'm telling you right now, you're conditioned to do this. We're always sizing up the competition. And here's how I know we do that, because that's our culture, a culture of image. It pushes on the family because we all are trying to go, no, we're great. Everything's wonderful. Look how great we are. We kind of have this thing in our culture where we think, you know what? Like we know the words, but we actually live like this. You fake it till you make it. And here's how I know that's a hollow foundation, because in a culture that's built on image that we're always performing and comparing, everybody's exhausted and nobody's ever content. Like you never talk to somebody and they'll think about how you doing. I'm just so rested. Think about it. You never, well, how's things go? I just got so much rest. I'm just so laid. No, you don't. We're always, living life. Man, trying to keep it between the lanes, right? Just busy, right? And so in that culture, exhausted and discontent. Listen to me. Pastor to people for a second. Can I be honest with you? If there's something that's pained me about the church, and by the church, I mean capital C church, not necessarily Bethlehem Church, over the years. And I've pastored for 20 years, 10 years as student pastor, working with the next generation, 10 years as senior pastor. Some other jobs in there as well. Right? But what's pained me is that for whatever reason, for many people, our understanding of the church and Christianity has not delivered us from this, but added to this. And I don't know your story, I don't know your background, I don't know, but what I found at Bethlehem Church is oftentimes cultural Christianity, the understanding of the churches maybe we grew up in, or the picture of Christianity, we felt the most pressure to perform, and we were always comparing ourselves with people around us. I'm not good enough. I don't look the part. So listen to me right here. I want everybody to look at me. This is going to free you up. When I preach, my preaching, I never think to myself, man, I'm talking to people who got their act together. Because I think you're like me. And I think everybody struggles, and everybody's wrestling, and everybody has issues. I preach to people who I think need Jesus and are in need of Jesus every day. See, what's the secret sauce at Bethlehem Church? People ask me. Thousands of people a weekend, multiple campuses. 10 years in, we've been blessed. What's the secret sauce? It's not my preaching. What's the secret sauce? It's not our music. It's not our unbelievable facilities. We make them work. We got 1 million services and jacked up parking lots. Right? It's not our kids' ministry environments, although they're great. What's the secret sauce? What has made, listen to me right here. For 10 years, we've looked at you. I've looked at you and said this. It's okay not to be okay. 10 years, I've looked at you and said, it's okay if you're not okay. If you come and go, man, my life's not okay, we're okay with that, but here's the deal. It's okay if you're not okay, we're just not okay with you staying that way. Because when Jesus comes in the middle of things, Christianity is not an image you keep up, it's a person you follow. I'm going to say that again. Christianity is not some image you keep up, it's a person that you follow. And in a culture, what I want you to hear that chases an image, the most real thing, and I want you to put this down. Here's the best news, the most real thing that you can hold on to. Jesus doesn't see the image you want the world to see. He sees what you never want the world to know, and he loves you anyway. That'll preach. I should just pray right there and say, I'm leaving it there with you, but I'm going to keep going for a second. Jesus does not see in a culture of performance, and listen, I've got a church here, we got campuses other places, there's a school behind us. Listen to me. I see firsthand cultural Christianity at times at its best, and this pressure people feel to perform and act like they got their stuff together, and I want to look and go, you're not fooling anybody. Nobody's going, man, they're just wonderful. You know what? All of us are dealing with our own things, and less people are thinking about you than you realize. Can I free you up for a second? There's a whole lot less people looking at you and thinking about you than you actually think there are. Because everybody's dealing with their own stuff, man. And it blows me away in our culture where we always think everybody's sizing us up, that we miss this. The people at the end of the Sermon on the Mount who were most offended, like the people that Jesus went at in his ministry were not the people who were in need. They were people who didn't think they had a need. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, if you read Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and I encourage you to do it the next few weeks, at the end of Jesus' famous sermon, nobody goes, woo, we're going to do this. We got this thing. No, everybody was like, we could never live that life. And that was the point. He wanted them to know they had a deep need for him. And the people that didn't were called the Pharisees. They were people who liked to act the part without having a need. And that's the people Jesus went at. That's the people Jesus went at. Listen, what does it look to have a kingdom-oriented family in a fallen world? It doesn't look like you're keeping up an image that you're perfect, because you're not. Our marriage is nailing it. Good. There'll be a point where it's not. Our kids are awesome. Good. There'll be a point where they're a bunch of knuckleheads. It's going to happen. Look at me. I'm not being funny here. You can laugh. I'm kind of being funny. But I'm just saying, like, we all go, no, man, we got it together. Good. There'll be a point when it's going to be falling apart. That's family. That's a road trip. That's the journey we're on. We're all in need. So what does it mean? Let me give you two. So we're going to talk about habits this whole series. Again, next week's everything anxiety. You need to be here. You need to invite people in for a few weeks, because it's the thing that marks most families, anxiety, right now in our moment. But what are some habits? Here's what I say. We got to choose to be a family that depends on God, not performs for others. And that's a choice you make, and I'm going to illustrate it here. Depends on God, not performs for others. That's a choice you make. James, the brother of Jesus, who struggled with the idea that Jesus was the Son of God, when he finally got onto it, when he talked about prayer in James 4, here's what he says. If you will draw near to God, he will draw near to you. God wants to be needed. So what does that look like? Because again, I want you to listen right here. Oh, Coney 2:11, watching online, stop right there in the recliner and look at me for a second. Sit in this room right here. We have a tendency to go, we're a Christian family because we nod our hats at a bunch of morality, but we never actually depend on Jesus. We've got a prayer of blessing hanging in our kitchen, but we live by the value systems of the world. So what does it look like? Here you go. Let me give you examples. These are things Nan and Jason are learning. We don't have this figured out. So what Nan and I have learned is that praying with our kids about the pressures they feel at school, praying with our kids when they're having friend issues, when they're trying to make decisions, right? When they're discouraged. Actually praying with our kids has way more power than giving them a pep talk about their self-worth. I just said the whole sermon right there. Praying with our kids when they feel pressure, when things are hard, when they're discouraged, when there's friend drama, when there's school stuff. Actually stopping and praying with our kids has way more power than giving them a pep talk about their self-worth. Listen to me. Why? Because when all we do is give kids pep talks about their self-worth, we're playing on their emotions instead of letting our kids know how much we depend and need God. That was worth a sermon right there. Because we become a culture that's more conditioned. We become families that's more conditioned by our culture. And some of you mamas and daddies in the room, all you do is give your kids pep talks and you never show them how to depend on God. You never show them how to depend on God. That's what makes us different. God doesn't want us to manage our fear by self-talk. That's called self-dependence. God wants me to bring my fears to him. That's called depending on God. Not knowing an answer to something sometimes, when we face it as a family, when we face it as a couple, it may not be a right or wrong thing. Sometimes it's like option A, option B, option C, option D. We're looking at some options here. We're not sure. Not knowing that doesn't mean I'm inadequate as a father. It means I'm a human and I need to depend on something besides myself. And so when I pray, I'm inviting God. And listen to me, if the language of our culture of image, the language of our culture of image is everybody performs and everybody compares. Here's what I want you to see. Prayer is the language of dependency. Prayer is the language of dependency. What is real in a culture of image is we have a deep need for Jesus. The church is not people who have their act together. The church is the people who raise their hand going, we don't have it together, and we need salvation that comes outside of us, and that salvation is found in the name and the person of Jesus. Church, he can do for you what no one else can do because he has a power no one possesses. Can I say this to you again? He can do what no one else can do for you because he has a power no one else possesses. He will never mock you in your weakness. He doesn't look at your family. He doesn't look at your marriage. He doesn't look at your prodigals and go, oh, I'm just so over it. He never does. He's never disgusted with you. When you're disgusted with yourself, when you're disgusted with your kids, when you're frustrated with your marriage, God does not look down at us frustrated with us. Listen to me. He has no favorites. He shows no partiality. God is not exhausted by your need. He's drawn to it. Can I say that, ma'am, to you? Can I say that, sir, to you? In a culture that says you better act the part, be the part, show it. Most of the time in families, the church doesn't get involved until things are so far down the road you can't help them see the way out of it. Because we're all under this pressure of I got to look the part, I got to be the part. And what I'm saying to you is this. A family that is different understands that God is not exhausted by our need. He's drawn to it. He's drawn to it. So let me say this to you. A family that depends on God isn't a family that has a plaque on there. It isn't a family that prays it just at meals, that has a plaque on their kitchen that says, God bless this kitchen, or God bless this mess. You know that one? No. It's a family that actually is constantly inviting God in to their life. That we're continually depending, and that's just part of what we do, is invite God in. Because instead of giving ourselves a pep talk to let us face this big bad world, we actually are people who know it's not in us. We need help outside of us, and that's why we need Jesus, and that's why we depend on him. Who's with me, church? That's the church. That's the gospel. And sometimes there's a picture that says it way better than I could ever say it. How many of you watched the Olympics this summer? How many of you, obviously it was weird because of COVID and all that jazz, like everything else in the world right now. But I love and respect Olympic athletes so much because of how much they work, how hard they work, how many years of training and conditioning and eating right and forming their body and forming their skill and forming their talent. I mean, Olympic athletes is the highest form of performance. You're working for a 5-minute performance most of the time in front of the whole world, against the whole world. That's the ultimate level of performance of an Olympic athlete. And I remember a story I read, and I remember as a kid seeing an image. The Barcelona Olympics in 1992, if you can believe it, almost 30 years ago. And I was a young guy, only 2 at the time. I was 12 or 13, but I was a young guy. And I remember seeing this image when I was like 6th or 7th grade, watching the Barcelona Olympics. It's the one before the Atlanta one, so I got into it. It's like, man, it's coming to Atlanta. And there's a story that I read about a 400-meter track, somebody who's running named Derek Redmond from Britain. 400-meter track, Derek Redmond from Britain, and he was the favored to win the quarterfinals, trained his whole life. Right, he was favored to win the ultimate performance, 400 meters. In the middle of it, he was the favorite to win. As the first turn happened, he had the lead. And out of nowhere, worst possible thing you could believe happened to an athlete. He blew his hamstring. Made the turn first, and as he made the turn, he blew out his hamstring. It was painful to watch both physically and emotionally if you watch this. Trained his whole life for this moment, and the whole world was watching, but he wanted to finish the race. And so he hobbled along as the other runners had their stuff together and moved on. He hobbled along, and out of nowhere, the most beautiful picture that you'll ever see of the gospel is a man ran to him, and this man is Jim, Derek's father. And this man ran to him and put his arms around his son. And in the story, if you read about it, his dad said, Derek, you don't have to do this. And Derek said, Dad, I've worked for this whole my life and I'm going to finish it. And here's what his dad said, then you're not going to do it by yourself. And Jim walked down the track 100 meters with his son's weight fully on him because he couldn't do it on his own. And as other people came and run to try to stop him, you see his father saying, get out of here, he's with me. And they crossed the finish line together. Look at me, Bethlehem Church. All of us think we're that sprinter that everybody's watching and we look good, and we have a God that knows we're way more hobbling than we are performing. We have a God that is drawn to our need. What he knows is this thing called family, this thing called marriage, this thing called raising kids, this thing called being a student. Much of our life, we're way more hobbling than we are sprinting for the world to see. And God doesn't go, oh man. He's drawn to it. He comes forward. Jesus comes to us just as we are, right where we are. He doesn't see the image you're trying to put out on the world to see. He sees you just as you are, and he loves you anyway. The beautiful picture of Jim and his father, Derek and his father, Jim, is a picture of the gospel and that God actually wants to be needed. He is drawn to your need. He is not disgusted by it. He wants to be needed. He is not exhausted by it. Will you stand with me across this room? Can I pray for you as we close? With your head bowed and eyes closed. The posture of need is sometimes just holding your hands out, maybe by your sides there. Just kind of hold your hands out for a second like you're asking for something. Like hey, need. And I want you to hear these words I'm saying. Christianity, following Christ, is not an image you keep up. It's a person you follow. At the end of Jesus' famous sermon, everybody thought, I can't never do this. That was the point. That we would have a deep need for Jesus. What separates us, what makes us a light of the world, city on a hill, is that we're not people that have our act together. We're people who go, we don't have it all together and we need Jesus. Are you inviting him in? Choose to be a family that depends on God and not performs for others. Right now, just go, we're not going to look the part. We're going to follow the person. Just right now, right where you're at. We're not, the call of the church is not for all of us to have our act together. The call of the church is that we're different. See, here's the deal. We are people who are different because of Jesus in a world that's in desperate need of Jesus. That's what it means to depend. We're a family that's different because of Jesus in a world that's in desperate need of Jesus. Gentlemen, fathers, husbands. And Jesus says, these words of mine are that firm foundation.